How's it going? Welcome back. Today is, what is it, February 20th, 2015. I'm Christopher Taylor. If you've been with me before in my prior videos, welcome back. If not, welcome to the show. Anyway, I haven't done one of these little forecasts since about August, so it's been about 6 months or so. So I wanted to give some update on where we are and where we're headed. So just to review from where we were last time in October, I had mentioned things back in August about October and that opening up certain windows and decisions we make in that period of October-ish, October, November-ish, really leading to something down the line here in the spring of 2015. And so here we are in February 2015, getting close to the spring, and there's a few big shifts happening coming up in the next couple of months that I want to talk about. Back in August, I talked about the eclipses coming up in October. That was part of that opening of the window. We have a new set of eclipses coming up here in late March, early April. So that's a big part of this, but there's also some continuation of some of the energies I talked about before. So just to refresh. Anyway, it's good to be back here. And so I want to talk about something I've been talking about in many prior videos, going back to the spring of 2012. And that is this square between Pluto in Capricorn and Uranus in Aries. Okay, this has been going on since that time, since about spring of 2012. This is about a 3-year period, okay, that is coming to an end here in 2015. So March 16th will be the final of 7 exact squares between Pluto and Uranus. And so March 16th, 2015, then those planets will start to spread apart. They won't be in that square aspect anymore. And so we're going to start moving on from where we've been thematically for the last 3 years or so. And so this period of 3 years has been a period of choosing which directions we're going to take on a collective level. A lot of transformation going on. Pluto and Capricorn being transformation of those rules and boundaries and governments even. And Uranus and Aries is that independence and that kind of doing what we are in the world. And there's some of that going on at a personal level too that we'll get into. But again, just to refresh you, this Pluto-Uranus square, the initiation of this cycle of Pluto and Uranus goes back to the 1960s. That's when Pluto and Uranus were conjunct in Virgo. And so what was birthed in the mid to late 1960s is what we've been deciding on here between 2012 and early 2015. So we've been in this period on a collective level of making decisions for all the things that were birthed at that time, over 40 years ago, 45 years ago or so. And some of the things that were birthed at that time were, technological advances, but also things like human rights, civil rights, and those kind of things. Environmental awareness, so in terms of humans' effects on the earth, etc. So these are a lot of the awarenesses, those are just a few of them that came out of the 1960s and things that we're really working on in these last few years. And when we get to the late 2040s, that's when Pluto and Uranus will be opposing each other. That will be the results, the sort of culmination and fruition of everything that was birthed in the 60s and now cultivated here in this last few years. So these last few years have been very important on a collective level for that reason. And so the collective, really, what I alluded to back in August, it's really adapting and changing to hold more of the individual, in a supported fashion. So we've lived in this world where we're taught from the day we're born, it's dog eat dog, that you have to work your hardest to survive, not even to thrive, but just to survive. And what's been happening these last few years is with the new awarenesses that came out of the 1960s that have just kind of birthed forth and they've been rippling around for the last several decades, they're starting to be put into practice in certain ways. We're going to see that happening over the next few years. But as is right now, we're going to finish up this period. So here we are in late February. We literally have just weeks left of this 3-year Pluto-Uranus square, which is kind of what started me up on these videos in the first place. So really exciting. We made it to the end. And there's other things underlying in that as well. So some of the things happening with this, and just to kind of summarize where we're at in this phase, basically after the spring, the world is now going to be ready to hold the individual in a more supported fashion. That's that Uranus and Aries aspect of it. So in other words, we've been literally shifting around the rules. So whether they're financial rules, rules about how we govern ourselves, etc., that are now going to be more supportive of the individual. So we'll see, like I said, over the next few years that coming out. But the point is that period of it being in the oven still. Think of it like a cake in the oven. The cake has been in the oven for 3 years, and we'll be able to take that cake out here in the spring. Does it mean we're going to eat it all at once? No. But it will be finished. We'll have to let it sit there and cool, see what comes of it before we can put the icing on it and everything else. But it will be done cooking by this end of this spring, okay? So that's just to kind of put that in a framework of understanding to know where we're at. Other things happening around that. So with society essentially shifting to now support individuals, shifting the very foundation of what we consider, reality and what is possible for an individual to achieve in the world. So how have we been developing across, during this entire time as well? If we go back to 2010, I mentioned this in August as well. Jupiter and Uranus were conjunct. That started a cycle. Okay, they were conjunct at the very end of Pisces, the very beginning of Aries. That is literally the transect of the end of the zodiac and the beginning of the zodiac. The zodiac ends in Pisces, begins in Aries. So when anything that's passing through that space between the end of Pisces, beginning of Aries, is essentially like the birthing of a new. Okay, and Jupiter and Uranus, they joined each other there. And that action had a lot to do with us in 2010, kind of coming into our own on an individual level, coming into like our truth. What is it that we have that's unique in the world that we want to offer? And a lot of us were, threw ourselves into certain work, et cetera, in 2010, and that kind of rippled out for a few years. When we got to 2013, 2014, that's when we were kind of challenged to really choose which directions fit us, and which directions in the world fit who we are, in other words. And so that could have been a pretty big challenge. During that same time in 2013, 2014, we had this whole retrograde train that I went over a couple of videos prior, probably about a year ago, I think I went over that. And in the retrograde train was all the personal planets, Mercury, Venus, and Mars, going through this period of retrograde, which is just introspection and review and going over things and redoing things and restructuring things. And so our relationships, how we take action in our relationships, all that was restructured. So really what we were doing in 2013, 2014 was learning how to adapt our new sense of self with other people. So we can no longer just operate in codependent habits that we create with people that say, okay, this is how I behave with this person just to get by. This is how I behave with this person just to get by. It's about being authentic and being one person all the time, and just adjusting how we respond to others. And so it's a real sense of boundaries that we've developed over the last few years. So 2013, 2014 was big in regards to that. As we got into, later into 2014, and just to add another layer onto this, Saturn from late 2012 right on through here in late 2014 was in the sign of Scorpio. And Saturn in the sign of Scorpio is a time of really getting real about the stuff we need to let go of in order to move on, in order to move forward. So we could have had this birthing of self in 2010, and we have society shifting to support that starting in 2012. But also starting in 2012, we had, if we're going to go there, we have to get rid of what's in the way of preventing us from going there. And so we've had to get in touch with a lot of our darkness, a lot of our shadow material, as they say in Jungian psychology. It's not always bright and cheery all the time. In December of 2014, that's when Saturn shifted into Sagittarius. Okay, Sagittarius is all about the truth. It's all about where we're going in a forward direction, looking at the future in a forward motion, and how it fits in with our truth. Okay, so Saturn in Sagittarius is time period from late 2014 right on through late 2017. It's a 3-year period that we've just kind of initiated here in the last couple of months. This is a time period of walking the walk. We've been talking the talk for several years now, for about 4 or 5 years now. It's time to start walking the walk. And now it was hard to walk the walk when society wasn't really open for it. So we started talking the talk in 2010. Society started to open in 2012. It will be, like I said, the cake will be cooked here starting the summer of 2015. And it's now time from 2014 to 2017, in that kind of overlap, to be walking the walk finally. So we're going to find that it's almost like just by focusing on what our truth is and who we are and what we represent as individuals in this world, it's like the world is shifting for us. Okay, and I mentioned this back in August as well. And if we go back to this idea of the Jupiter Uranus conjunction in 2010, again, the birth of that sense of self and independence and individuality. Then we were making decisions in 2013, 2014, how we interact with people. Right up into the summer of 2014, it was really a lot of, facing certain people, certain relationships, family relationships, whatever it is, and just really having to stand our ground in a new way. And again, not to fight, but to find balance and find harmony where we're not cutting ourselves off, not sacrificing parts of ourselves. In fact, setting even deeper, more defined boundaries about where we begin and end, making ourselves bigger, essentially, in the process, okay? And now Jupiter and Uranus are in a trine aspect, okay? Jupiter is in Leo, sign of Leo, and Uranus is in Aries, okay? The two fire signs. I mentioned this back in August. In October, these two planets started that trine, okay? And that's going to end here in June of 2015. So we're about halfway between, halfway done with this Jupiter-Uranus trine. And as we approach March here, so today's February 20th, so just a couple weeks from now, March 3rd, 4th, kind of around that time period, Jupiter and Uranus are going to make their second of 3 trines. So the first in October, second one here in March, and the final one will be in June, when it will start to separate. And so this is kind of like the smooth sailing for what was initiated, planted in 2010, what we had to decide on 2013, 2014 with regards to how we're going to present ourselves with others. And now it's like we're kind of riding the wave, okay? And I mentioned back in August that in October, with the eclipses that were coming up at that time, and it was a pretty wild eclipse period for me. I'll mention a little bit about it. I'm curious about what your stories were like. But what happened was I said that whatever we're deciding on in October, there'll be kind of things coming at us, opportunities, options, coming at us, and some that may or may not look, with our heads at least, to be ideal for us. Okay, whether that's a job or a relationship or a living location. But the idea being that we were just following our hearts, following our guts, and by being in touch with our true selves, again, represented by kind of Jupiter, Uranus, okay, by being in touch with our true selves, we're just kind of trusting our instincts to be taken in certain directions, okay? So in October, there were certain things that happened. Like, for example, I lost my job. I had a full-time job up until that point. Lost my job right the same week of the eclipse, but I also started a new relationship that same week of the eclipse. So it was a pretty wild, shifting kind of a week. And that relationship I started was not something that, if I was using my head solely, that I may have decided on. Okay, I just kind of went with what was, what was happening in my life at that time. And now here we are several months later, and a lot of the directions my life has been taking now, as we speak, are a direct result of this person I started a relationship with in October that I, again, if I was just looking at it in black and white terms, using my head, maybe would have decided differently. But it's been a lot of positive things have come out of this situation. And other positive things about being let go of the job as well, because there are certain things that are opening up to me now that I wouldn't have had opportunities for if that didn't happen. So just kind of riding that wave as we speak. And now as we're rolling into early March with the Jupiter-Uranus trine, the second of the 3 trines, again, October, March, and then in June, I'm just trying to see where this is going to take me. I've got a couple of interviews lined up here and things that, again, that I wouldn't have been open to if I had that job, and that I wouldn't have been led to if it wasn't for that relationship that started in October as well. So really, interesting stuff when in retrospect, when you look at it, how it all lines up. Things that you might have said no to, that if you just said yes, suddenly your life, takes you in a new direction. And that's kind of where I'm at, wondering where you're at with that and how you've been flowing through this whole October through now kind of period, these last 4 months or so. And I want you to tap into that flow. If you resonate with the idea of that life has been kind of flowing since that point in a certain direction, even if we don't know where that's headed, I would encourage you to stick with it. Just stick with the flow. Keep going with that flow and see where it takes you. Because these jobs or people or things that we decided on in the last few months may lead us to other people and jobs and things that we wouldn't have been led to, okay? So just stick with that, stay on that. That would be my advice. An interesting thing that's happening today, again, is Friday the 20th. Tomorrow, the 21st of February, the planets Venus and Mars, they just entered Aries. Literally, Mars entered Aries yesterday on the 19th, and Venus entered Aries today on the 20th. And tomorrow on the 21st, they're going to be conjunct. They're going to be initiating a new cycle. I've mentioned a few, when planets come together, it's initiating a new cycle, like Pluto and Uranus in the 1960s, Jupiter and Uranus in the 2010, and now we have this Venus-Mars, which is the first conjunction of those two planets in about 2 years, just almost about 23 months. It's been since the last one was March of 2013, so it doesn't happen all the time, but we will actually have another couple of conjunctions in 2015, one in August, one in October, November time frame. Those would be 2 more Venus-Mars conjunctions. But this one I want to focus on because where it's located, right at the 0 degrees Aries point, right at that transect between the end of Pisces, beginning of Aries, which is exactly where the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction was in the 2010. So this is thematically related to what was happening in 2010, the birth of ourselves. Now we have this creative burst, this Venus-Mars. This is creativity. This is the feminine and masculine together. It is what creates, essentially, okay? And so there's a sense of getting a second wind, okay? We may have started projects in 2010 or in the following years after that failed miserably, okay? Because we were ahead of our time. That's literally what was happening. We bursted forth before society shifted for us. Society didn't start shifting until about 2012, okay? And so when you burst forth 2 years prior to when society's ready for you, there's nothing to catch you. And so I've had that experience myself. I'm sure some of you have too, where we kind of bursted forth. We had great ideas. Things were flowing for a couple of years. And then in this discord of 3-year period of trying to figure out how society is going to support that, things have kind of fallen apart. And some of us can get discouraged and think, well, I tried and I failed, but that's in the past now. And I'm going to try to do something else. And what this energy is telling us, again, is ride this wave that we're on now. Ride it and know that there is a chance for a second wind. There is a chance to let go of the past completely. The last couple of months, January and February especially, have been a lot about getting in touch with our true gifts and talents, getting in touch with what we truly have to offer, reminding us of that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in 2010. Where were we then? Remember what we have to give. Remember the skills that we have. Remember the offerings that we have. And so this is our second wind time with this Venus-Mars conjunction here in the 0 degrees Aries point on February 21st. So this is not just a one-day event. This is opening up for the next several months, this time period of digging back in, getting creative with who we truly are in the world and offering that. And this is going to lead us up. Like I said, just a couple weeks later, Jupiter and Uranus are in trine, so this suggests that, yeah, we're in that wave. Just ride it. Like put the sails up and ride the wind. You don't have to struggle. You just have to ride that wave as long as it'll take us. So late February, early March is all about just getting back in touch with our creative impulse and going back and digging up some old things that we might have created in the past and saying, how can I make this more relevant for today? How can I take this and go even further than I did before? And we may have to get through some of those stumbling blocks and things, and that's part of why Saturn went through Scorpio in the last couple of years, to really get at our fears. Like I said, the darkness, the shadow of us, get at the fears of us that really were standing in our own way when we were trying to move forward, in the last several years. And just align with ourselves and walk the walk. Saturn's in Sagittarius now, so it's walk the walk. When we get into March, mid-March, March 14th, I believe, Saturn goes retrograde in Sagittarius, okay? 2 days later is the final of 7 Pluto-Uranus squares. So there's that last, the finality of the cake finally being cooked here. So mid-March is really a transition. And then 4 days after that, March 20th, we have a solar eclipse. And guess where that lands? At 29 degrees Pisces. In other words, the very end of Pisces, very beginning of Aries. So we have that point lit up in 3 different ways here, okay? We have it lit up, again, Jupiter-Uranus conjunction 2010. Now, tomorrow, February 21st, Venus-Mars conjunction. And then we're going to have a solar eclipse a month later, on March 20th. This is very thematic, very potent with this theme of endings and beginnings. And so Pisces is about releasing the past and finishing things, and Aries is about new birth, new life, almost naiveness to it. Because Aries is like the child of the zodiac, okay? So it's almost as if we're dying and being reborn, okay? And so it's important to know that any creative ideas that came to us between 2010 and 2012, for example, that started to falter once you get into 2012, resurrect them. It's time to move. It's go time, for sure. It's go time now. And we have the wind behind our sails right now. We have with that Jupiter-Uranus trine. The wind is behind our sails. Just go. Take little steps, and they'll take you far. So it's less of a struggle time period now. We've gone through all the hardships, It's time to move. So that solar eclipse that comes up on March 20th, that's also going to be in a trine to that Saturn that's going to be freshly retrograde in Sag now. So it is literally aligning us with taking our talk and making us say, yes, it's time to walk the walk and to use all the stuff that we birthed and put it all together into something coherent, okay? 2 weeks after that, in early April, April 4th, will be a lunar eclipse. That's going to be in the sign of Libra, okay? About halfway through Libra, about 14, 15 degrees Libra. That is going to highlight the ending, essentially, of the Pluto-Uranus square, as it opposes Uranus in Aries and squares Pluto in Capricorn. It's like the grand finale, the grand culmination of that energy. It will also sextile Jupiter in Leo. So that suggests to me, and Jupiter will go direct in Leo about 4 days after that eclipse. So what that suggests to me is that we are, that solar eclipse is like the point where we now know the cake is cooked, society is ready. So get rid of that past, any past, defeats or perceived failures. Align with those people that will elevate us to the highest, to the highest point of our expression. And that's really what this is about. So when we get to April, it really is about just honing who we really are, joining with those folks that will hoist, that will buoy that up, and vice versa, where we can help others. So we're going to be helping each other, lift each other up to our highest potential starting in April. So what exactly transpires, with this, who knows? And I suspect that it won't be until about the summer that we'll really see what shifts in society and why it's opening up for us. But I think we're going to be linking up with some people here in the spring, April, May, June time frame. We'll be linking up with the right people that when things are finally completely ripe, when that cake is now cooled off and it's cool enough to put the ice on it and eat it, well, that's when the summer comes around. And I won't get too deep into what's going on in the summer, but a couple of things just to note on a collective level, personal level. Saturn will be dipping back into Scorpio for a few months, from mid-June to mid-September. Within that time frame, from late July to early September, so sandwiched right into that 3-month period for Saturn and Scorpio, Venus will be in retrograde, okay? And that will retrograde very early Virgo back into Leo, okay? And so this is going to be a time of, again, getting back in touch with maybe some perceived failures, just putting the final caps on anything we need to really put behind us and leave in the past. But we're going to have to just kind of dip into some of that stuff for one final round, essentially. And so this can mean getting rid of relationships that are no longer working. This can mean, just totally, wiping out any or facing any debts we might have or something like that. Facing any demons we have at any sort of level. And it could also mean, having to leave something steady as far as pay goes to do something more risky that aligns with ourselves. And that might make us a little bit frightened because maybe we tried that before in the last several years between 2010 and 2012, for example, and maybe it didn't quite work out. Okay? But the idea being that this summer is time to go for it again. And it's not the same. It won't be the same experience because the world has changed. And that's the key factor here. So anyway, that's the summary, the way I look at it, where we're at, kind of where we're moving through this. But just note, Mars is back in fire. Mars was in fire in October when this whole wave started, this kind of ride the wave period started. Mars was in Sagittarius at that time. It wasn't in any fire signs until now. It just entered Aries yesterday on the 19th of February. And it's joining with Venus in Aries. So again, we have fire, fire, fire. Creativity is the theme. So I would just suggest ride the wave that we're in now. Know that these eclipses coming up in March and April are about really aligning us with that inner fire, the inner creativity, the things we've already started, our true gifts, and aligning us with the right people to do that. And also denoting the fact that the cake is done. Society is now shifted in a certain way that we might not be able to see right away, but we'll know in retrospect that it has. And again, that's the Pluto-Uranus square that is finally coming to an end, going all the way back to June of 2012. So that's where we're at. And like I said, we get to the summer, there'll be a little bit of a pullback, but it's only to get us totally aligned with where we're headed from here on out. So with that, thank you very much for tuning in. Again, I'm Christopher Taylor of Sovereign Harmony. You can check out my website, sovereignharmony.com. I do individual readings using astrology. I also can work with families and businesses, etc. And if you're interested, please get a hold of me. My information will be below. And until next time, I'd also like to hear any stories you might have that maybe started in October or so, and how what your riding the wave experience has been like. I gave you a little bit of a glimpse of my experience. I'd love to hear some of yours with the comments below. So with that, I will sign off, and we will see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye.